Good morning again, everyone. Our readings this morning are from Luke chapter 19, verses 1 to 10, and from Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 to 17. So from Luke chapter 19. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." And from Colossians, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you were called to peace. And be thankful. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly, as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him."
Good morning. I loved hearing that story from Emma this morning about the life of St. Teresa. It was a life that began with a teenage girl doing loving acts of kindness to the people around her, and she became well known for that. Today, I invite you to reflect on God's loving kindness with me. And just as Emma asked the children to think of ways in which they could be kind, I wonder if you can think of something where you have received kindness or you have given kindness in the last few weeks. Perhaps there's an outstanding moment that you've noticed. Perhaps it's in recent past, or maybe it was from childhood or a long time ago. Perhaps you have been involved in being kind to someone and you've remembered it many years later. Being kind can leave an imprint on your life and on the other people's lives, building relationships and in turn transforming communities. I wonder if those of you watching online would like to pop in the comments box some of those things that you've remembered, or maybe jot down on a piece of paper beside you to chat with a friend about later or in the Zoom room. This week, the world has been mourning the death of the Duke of Edinburgh, of Prince Philip. And I have noticed many people from many different walks of life reflecting on moments when they have noticed or received a kind word from him or an act of kindness. He left his imprint on people's lives and they remembered him and remembered those moments. As Christians, there are many stories within the Bible about God's kindness. Perhaps today you are tuning into this service for the first time and are exploring Christianity for yourself, curious about what it is that's distinctive. And you are very welcome in this space, and today I invite you to listen and to join with us as we reflect together on God's loving kindness. In these last weeks, as we begin to lift our lockdown restrictions, I have been in a series of meetings during the day or in the evening, which have been life-giving. They've been full of promise and full of purpose, hope of good things to come. In these same conversations, we've explored the more difficult aspects of lockdown restrictions easing. Difficult aspects of keeping safe. Difficult aspects of maintaining the work or the project or the ministry. The good has always overcome the tricky moments, and humour has been a great leveller amongst the words shared. There will be more conversations to keep happening, and these conversations need to be kind and gracious, generous spaces for this to happen, where difficult moments and difficult conversations can be transformed, where listening is at the heart and the desire to control situations is left to one side. Kindness in our world today is often seen as a soft option, its power underestimated. Yet, the Apostle Paul, in our reading to the church, reminds us it is a fruit of the Spirit which we are to clothe ourselves with. Our gospel reading is a story from the life of Jesus and an encounter with another person, which gives us a clue about what God's kindness is. We heard how Jesus chose to invite Zacchaeus to come down from the sycamore tree for tea. A sycamore tree which would have been situated outside the main town centre and streets. The tree climbed was at the end of the road, at the back of the crowd that were jostling to see Jesus. Somehow Zacchaeus knew he did not want to miss out. He was drawn to find out about Jesus. He did not go with anyone, and he must have known how people regarded him because of his underhand practices. There was not much kindness received or given by Zacchaeus as he collected money from other people. Yet Jesus stops, notices him, calls him by name, and invites him to tea. Zacchaeus experiences a moment where Jesus is kind. He knew his name. He even wanted to come into his home and have tea. Jesus chooses to spend time with the little guy no one liked. During tea, something must have happened within the conversation between Zacchaeus and Jesus that transformed this mean, underhand man, a man who was in control of others and lived in the power that control gave him, a man who showed no kindness, perhaps a man in the pockets of the Roman officials. But Jesus transformed him into a kind, generous man who did good to others and chose to put right the wrongs and give back more than he took to those he cheated. Now, most of you know I work within the schools, the primary schools in Grantham, and this is a great story that we use in the school assemblies. We have fun dressing up the children, having large inflatable palm trees with chairs hidden behind for children to climb and be Zacchaeus. We have Jesus and his friends at the front of the assembly hall, and the children in the hall become the crowd. We have a lot of fun. There is a lot of laughter. But once all this has happened and we settle down, I ask this question. I wonder what Jesus said in Zacchaeus' house while he had tea. Over the years, I've had many answers. Some children will say Jesus told him off and told him to give the money back, to say sorry and be nice. But one child, many years ago, before I was in Grantham, answered it like this. I think Jesus was kind. He would have said his house was lovely, but it probably would have been messy. He would have told him he looked fine, even if he was letting himself go, having just climbed a tree. He would have said the food was lovely, even if it wasn't, and he was having yesterday's leftovers. He would have listened. He would have told a story about his life, and Zach would have seen what it is to be kind. I like this. This child had put herself into the story wholeheartedly. She imagined what it was to be Zacchaeus and understood enough of who Jesus was to imagine how he would have built a friendship. She knew just how Jesus might have been kind. As we reflect on this story, I wonder if you have ever been hurt by a Zacchaeus in your lives and find yourself grumbling about them. Or perhaps there may have been moments where you have been like Zacchaeus and the person people are grumbling about. Jesus reacted in two ways with Zacchaeus. He called this man people grumbled about by name. Jesus knows us and calls us by name. And he ate with him. He sat and he was with him in the ordinary, everyday moment of having a meal. Today, as I've reflected on what it is to be kind as a Christian in its truest form, I think it's the hardest thing possible. It requires of me to renew my mind, to see the world around me and the people in it with a gracious kindness, a Christ-like kindness, perhaps as Jesus did with Zacchaeus. It requires a loving attitude, despite how a person might behave towards me. It requires, though, me to speak the truth with kindness and challenge things which are not quite right in order to bring hope and transformation. Kindness is generous. It requires me to see kindly and to listen generously. It is a God-filled, grace-filled action. This isn't a passive, weak action, but an intentional, hopeful action. An action that has an awareness of a reality of a situation, requiring sensitivity, love, and compassion, to hold all the people in that moment with real care, to empower them, to bring the best out in them, and to not control them to my own agenda. It requires me, though, to acknowledge my own humanity and my own failings in this. We might simply not want to be kind to everyone. It's hard to walk with kindness in situations and with people perhaps in society or I find difficult. But as Jesus' followers, as people who listen to his voice, we're called to do this. I wonder who you might find it hard to be kind to each day. Jesus came so we may have life and life to the full. This is a powerful generosity, a powerful kindness in a world where scarcity is around us. and the abundance of kindness is not often on offer. We are called to be thoughtful, empathic, and gentle. It is a generous attitude that brings life. John Donahue writes beautifully in his book Blessings about kindness, and I found these words really help me understand, and I'm going to share them with you now. There is a kindness that dwells deep down in things. It presides everywhere, often in the places we least expect. The world can be harsh and negative, but if we remain generous and patient, kindness inevitably reveals itself. Something deep in the human soul seems to depend on the presence of kindness. Something instinctive in us expects it, and once we sense it, we are able to trust and open ourselves up. The word kindnesses has a gentle sound that seems to echo the presence of compassion. When someone is kind to you, you feel understood and seen. There is no judgment or harsh perception directed towards you. Kindness has gracious eyes. It is not small-minded or competitive. It wants nothing back for itself. Kindness strikes a resonance with the depths of your own heart. It suggests that your vulnerability, though somehow exposed, is not taken advantage of. Rather, it has become an occasion of dignity and empathy. Kindness casts a different light, an evening light that has the depth of colour and patience to illuminate what is complex and rich in difference. So in my tricky conversations and moments in my weeks where there is complex and rich difference, thinking about the story of Zacchaeus and these words about kindness helps cast a different light, bringing dignity and empathy to the conversations. Sometimes I think we need to remind ourselves that kindness is there in the depths of our hearts and other people's hearts, and that God's kindness and God's loving kindness is redemptive. It calls us to put others before ourselves. It brings hope to individuals and transforms them. It transforms communities and could and can transform the world. The kindness, this loving kindness, is experienced as we meet Jesus in our worship, through reading the Bible, in our care for one another, and when we can, in our communion services. We do this knowing that Jesus died for us. And in these post-Easter resurrection days, we receive this blessing of kindness wrapped in forgiveness. Forgiveness and kindness, God's forgiveness and God's kindness sit together as a tremendous blessing for us. Jesus did not withhold kindness from Zacchaeus because of the way he was living his life. He showed him a different way. I imagine that Jesus restored and forgave Zacchaeus, his hands swift to welcome and his arms to embrace, as we will sing in our final hymn. Jesus welcomes us too. His love forgives us and restores us. As we know, he calls us by name and we follow. So as we heard in Paul's letter to the Colossians, we are called as God's chosen people to clothe ourselves with kindness, to forgive one another, and to love all together in perfect unity. As I end, I wonder this week, how will you give and receive kindness within your homes, within your communities, within your workplace? Will it be a kindness which empowers and transforms others?